that together was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. So not easy, but also like among the most probably also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Like this is related, like this is actually like deeply related to my experience of like connecting with people, but didn't become relevant or available until later in my life. But I would say basically, yeah, unblocking all that love with my mom really unblocked a lot of love for myself, and is basically like kind of like fundamentally shifted how I relate to people.
All right. Got it. Johnson, Hsieh, welcome to the podcast, episode number 1. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Loving the, yeah. And I like that even though it's nighttime where you are, you're continuing the Bali daytime backdrop.
Yeah. Gotta represent.
Representing. Yeah, we're in different parts of the world right now. I wanted to start by giving a little intro to my sense of who you are. And I had a quick skim of this birthday document that a bunch of your friends, I think 34 of your friends, came together and just like wrote stuff and shared stuff about you in this pretty cool, well, amazing thing. And I just saw some terms that were used most frequently to describe you were energetic, kind, curious, thoughtful, and shirtless. So I'm a little bit disappointed that you're so shirted.
I can accommodate. Asking you shall receive, my friend.
I'll have to tag the YouTube video for adults only, I guess. Yeah, how did those words resonate with you, and what was it like to receive that birthday document?
Yeah, they resonate. Those are largely how I would describe myself. And I love that. Like I described it and continue to describe it as like the best thing I've ever gotten. Like my favorite thing that I've ever
received.
Maybe
you could say a bit more about what it is, actually. I don't think I did a very good job of introducing the concept.
Yeah, sure. So for my 30th birthday, my best friend like got 2 of my other best friends, and they collaborated on sending this little survey out to a bunch of my friends, asking questions like, how would you describe Johnson, and what are some of your favorite memories, and what do you like about him? And they like compiled this like all these responses, and then kind of analyzed the data and made this PowerPoint presentation out of it. Yeah, it's really, really sweet.
Yeah. And there's some when I hear about that, there's like some slight envy in me that you have such like a large group of friends and a number of friends who would go like that far to put a lot of effort into this thing. It was kind of like some data science in there that was all related to a lot of personal things about you. And I think it points towards something about you, which is like really interesting to me. It's like how you go about building a community of really supportive friends into your life.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I feel really grateful and lucky to have that. And I suppose it's taken a lot of work, and, you know, I've made mistakes along the way, certainly. So it's not fully all, what is it? Like rainbows and butterflies, but it is pretty amazing. Yeah.
So yeah, like how did you come to have a life where like a whole bunch of your friends would come together and say such like put a lot of effort into creating something like that for you? And I guess when I see the document, it's not just that people put effort into it. It's just the kinds of things people said in it were really, other than like the extroversion and these words that describe your personality, there was lots of stories in there about like deep connections people have with you in various ways. And I know a lot of people don't have such a flourishing, broad network of friends. And I'm curious how it was that you came to have that, and if that was always the case.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a very long version of the story, but I think like the most relevant part is probably growing up not feeling like I had very much connection. I was an only child, like didn't have that many friends to play with, read a lot. And so once I hit middle school and I was able to have like friends, I was like, I'm gonna just do this. Like, this is the best, or like this is the thing that I want. And that's like that has roughly remained the case since, in the last close to 2 decades. Obviously, the contours of that and my relationship to that has shifted over time. But yeah, I think like I really wanted and needed connection, and so I had a lot of incentive to prioritize it, put time and effort into it, like figure out how it works, get better at it, all of that.
So there was a point in middle school where you got a bit more freedom and access to like leverage something new into your life there. So what's middle school in America now? That's like 13 years old.
13ish, yeah.
And at that point, what did you do? And was that challenging? And how did you go about doing whatever it was you did?
Yeah, I mean, I think prior to that, it was like I was dependent on my mom to take me to see friends if I wanted to see them, which she did not want to do that often, especially if she could not communicate with the parents in Chinese. So that drastically limited my pool of friends that I could see outside of school. But around middle school, around that 13ish years, like I was able to at least like walk places, and like I was like entrusted to do that, and so I could at least like walk to friends' houses and expand my social life.
Do you remember any challenge? Because I guess I'm imagining like this Johnson pre-13 who didn't have much experience like making new friends on his own, and maybe that's not true, I'm not sure. But then there was a point where you had this freedom to go and try and make new connections. Do you remember any challenges there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of. So I guess what I would say is pre-13 is like in school I had friends, but they felt like this like compartmentalized like part of my world that because like I was only able to see them during school. And I would say, yeah. And so when I got a little older and I was able to see them, that became a more integrated part of my world. Yeah, one of the things that was most challenging and continues to be somewhat of a challenge, for me in the middle school transition was having friends that were girls. Yeah, because prior to that,
did you have female friends in that while you were in middle school and high school?
Yes, I did. Still a minority, but I had some. Yeah, versus prior to that, I would say I didn't really have any.
And how about now? What's happened between the women in your life now, Johnson? And what's happened? Yeah, has there been? I guess there's been a journey there from like no female friends to having female friends in high school to like what your relationship is now in terms. I mean, I know we have a lot of mutual female friends, and I see like a lot of women on the document, and yeah, you mentioned like there's still some challenge there.
Yeah, I would say between high school and like a year ago, my relationship to women and women friends did not change really. Like basically I did have a few, but they were mostly like friends, like partners of friends, like partners of male friends of mine, rather than like standalone like people that I had like, friends, I guess. Versus in like the last year, I would say, yeah, I have made friends that are women, that are like standalone relationships, not the like attachment to another male friend.
Yeah.
And I would say still like it's so much it feels much more effortless to befriend men to me. Like there's something there, like there's just an ease to it. I think just, maybe a few decades of experience. I was at this retreat last week for 7 days, and like I would say most of my energy and attention was going towards like cultivating relationships with women there. And coming out of it, I was like, oh, and the three people I'm most interested in cultivating a relationship with out of this are men.
What's happening there? Is that a pattern that you see there?
Yeah. And I think that's always been the case. There's just like, it's just so much more easy for me to make friends with men for a number of reasons, I think. Yeah, and that is shifting over time. Like the ease of connection with women, like as friends, is improving, and it's still a work in progress.
I mean, I know that for me, there's the obvious added complexity sometimes is romantic interest,
right? Totally.
Whether it's explicit or uncertain or one way or not, or whether sometimes it's not there, I think perhaps, but it's often an undercurrent. And early on, especially if like both people are single, there's often something. What I'm noticing right now, though, I'm living in this house in France where you lived a year ago. I'm here with like 12 people. I think probably like 7 or 8 of them are female. I'm noticing I'm not really noticing. So maybe it's like an unusual. I think this is what I find when I live in community is that the gender difference becomes far less, or maybe just vanishes altogether. I'm not noticing like a greater struggle or a greater or less or anything. I imagine there's a possibility, though, at some point a romantic interest might emerge as a heterosexual man that would be with a woman, and so that is like a possibility of something that can emerge, obviously, with women and not with men. And so I think this points towards one thing, which is like community just makes things a little bit less, for me at least, like less complex. I think when I'm out there on my own in less of a community setting, I'm kind of more and I'm single, I'm often more focused on this need to get my social needs met, and it pulls me towards like desire for romantic connection in a way that is just like massively reduced when I'm in community. Just feels like that there's like when there's a lack of social connection, a large part of me gets pulled towards trying to find it through romance. Whereas when I have my connection filled, it's easier to have an easeful, let it be attitude. And yeah, I guess. Well, I know you've had a lot of different community experiences, so yeah, curious, like what experiences you've had in community. Well, I don't want to derail the conversation, though. I wonder if you had any more to say on that before we move on. But in a moment, I'd be curious to know how this ties into your experiences of community as well.
Yeah. No, all I would add is that what you just said resonates with me and has been in my experience also. Like when I'm living in community, like the gender thing, the gender thing kind of reduces dramatically. Yeah.
It makes me think of this phenomenon of like the very isolated, unromantically fulfilled male who ends up becoming like very toxic in their behavior. I can't remember which color pill. What's the pill color now? Yeah,
red pill maybe. I think. Yeah.
And I am, from what I can tell, there's like a lot of a correlation perhaps between like level of social connection and like level of importance one puts on the like male-female relationships, and to the point at which that just becomes very increasingly unhealthy in its perspective. And I think there's all kinds of unhealthy sort of things that can happen when people don't get their social needs met.
Definitely.
And so that's one thing that really, really draws me towards being really interested in spending a lot of time in community, because I find I feel more balanced.
And also, I imagine part of why you want to like create content related to like how to meet those needs better or more.
Well, I think part of it's because I want to have more of that in my life, and then part of it is that I just see that so many people have never had access to it, not just like don't have access to it now, and like there've been long periods of my life where I haven't had access to it, but I've also had it's been stratified with sections of like really great connection, and so I've seen how nourishing that is for myself and for everyone else I've been in with in those communities time and time again. Of course, people face challenges in community, and some people with different flavors of challenge depending on our extrovert. And you and I are both very, very extrovert, so it's probably. But two separate questions. Maybe take your pick. One is like, with the communities you've been in the in the past. You spent time with groups of people, and how have you seen that people have navigated this kind of romance kind of dynamic within community? Maybe just leave that question there for now. Come on later.
Yeah. It can be a tricky one. Man, I don't know how to answer that concisely. I think it can go really poorly,
maybe like
or it can go really well, and everything in between. And I've seen it go both ways.
Are there any stories that come to mind of like particular incidents that are quite insightful?
Let's see. Yeah, I think living in community, like, largely is the kind of like, largely, in my experience, ends up being the kind of wholesome, like, yay, people found each other sort of story. I think it provides like a really wonderful, I mean, especially like you get to see people in kind of all the different areas of their life. You know, you don't get the like you don't get like kind of the manicured like date version of people, you know. And so my sense is that is a really great way to like actually get to know someone, and vice versa, and that like connections that can facilitate can be really meaningful.
Is this why so many people talk about shirtless Johnson?
Probably not. I have yet to have a romantic connection with someone that I live with in community. So
that's interesting.
Personally,
yeah.
I personally I have observed it many times. Yeah. Shirtless is mostly like that. I spend time in places that are warm, and I like to not wear a shirt when I am hot, and I kind of just do it.
And you don't repair your malfunctioning buttons.
Actually, my mom insisted on fixing them this time I was in Taiwan, but on principle, I'm still not gonna button them up.
Your mom like imposed fixed buttons upon you.
Yeah, well, no, so I mean, it was like there were rips in that shirt that I wanted to get fixed, and she was like, "Okay, like I'll fix it, and while I'm at it, I'm gonna like fix these buttonholes so that it stays." And I was like, "Okay, fine."
Well, that is perhaps an interesting segue into a very different element of your life, which is your challenging relationship with your what has been a challenging, and you've done an amazing amount of work on your relationship with your mother. And I think this points towards like tools that are available to people to heal and work towards connection when relationships have been difficult. And I wonder if you'd be open to sharing some of the story of your relationship with your mom.
Yeah. What would I like to share? Well, for most of my life, I had a really not very good relationship with my mom. Teenage years were characterized by like mostly arguing with each other and yelling and screaming kind of thing. Then in younger years, like a lot of like hurtful things being said back and forth. And like even in my adult life in my 20s, like it was like I'd go home for a weekend, and every time like we'd get in an argument, despite me like trying to be on my best behavior, like trying to like not get in an argument, yet somehow like every single time inevitably like I would snap at some point, and an argument would happen. And for my whole life it was just this like, why can I not like peacefully coexist with my mom? Like, why is it like why can't we like just like, why is arguing and fighting inevitable? Like, not even like, can we have a good relationship, but can we just like not like attack each other kind of thing, you know? And so, I mean, arguably I've been trying to change that my entire life. And I would say earlier this year when I went back to Taiwan, I went with the intention of working on my relationship with my mom. And I mean, I had been putting in the groundwork for a while prior to that, but this was the first time it's ever worked, like it's ever meaningfully shifted, and tremendously so. Yeah, like I feel so much more love from her towards her, so much more ease like being around her, so much more like just desire to see her and be around her, to call her. Yeah, it's, and so like it's like and she's said that she's also reflected that from her perspective, it's like the relationship feels so much better. And yeah, it's just like been such a gift. And I mean, I'll note that it's like certainly not all rainbows and butterflies, right? Like there's certainly still plenty of challenge in a relationship, probably a lifetime's worth. And it's just like so much more connected, so much more loving, so much more useful.
Yeah. Well, that's a really beautiful story, and one that I think a lot of people will love to know more about, because I know how many people just struggle with their relationships with their parents and aren't able to mend that. And for me, that's certainly challenging. You mentioned putting in the groundwork, so I'm curious about both. Like concretely, specifically, what kind of groundwork are we talking about here? And then what were the processes and mechanisms of like getting from where you were to where you are now with your relationship with your mom?
Yeah, so I would say the groundwork was done without my mom, and then like the relational work was done with her. So I would describe the groundwork as, I mean, concretely, I would say was practicing a lot of IFS, NVC, authentic relating, and circling. Those were like my main things that I did.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of all those things. And yeah, they're all, I mean, on the grand scale of things, they're all pretty niche. Like not many people know about any of these things. Some of them are much more well-known than others, but none of them are that well-known. So I wonder if, you could unpack a little bit, like what are those 4 things and what's your relationship to each of them?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll start with IFS, which stands for Internal Family Systems. The name isn't that helpful, in my opinion, for understanding what it is. It's often referred to as parts work. It's like it's a therapy modality. It's the one that I've done by far the most of. The idea is we kind of to imagine ourselves as a collection of parts. And there's some like naturalness to it, right? Like, oh, like someone might say like, oh, like I'm feeling really tired, but part of me feels really tired, but part of me really wants to go to this event. And then part of me is like judging myself as lazy for not going, right? And there's like something like, and it ends up being, that like that part, that kind of framing of it is quite useful. I describe it as like a practice of structured self-compassion. There's this kind of, it's really not rocket science, but like, like this kind of like set of questions, and kind of usually it's done in like with someone guiding. And it just like is really, really helpful and beautiful in my experience for like kind of better understanding myself, better understanding why I do the things that I do, and coming to a place of kind of acceptance and compassion for that. And so that was really
guided me through. Right. Yeah, maybe we'll unpack H1 in a bit more. Meg, I wanted to dive both into it and go broad. What to do? I wanted to share that. Yeah, you guided me through a couple of sessions, and I love it. Did you come up with that term, structured self-compassion?
I haven't heard anyone else say it. I'm sure other people have said different versions of it, but
I've never heard that. I like that. It makes a lot of sense because it's. I think one of the things that allows for that self-compassion element to come in is you notice these parts, you notice the judgment, and then you kind of give space to each part to really be heard. And there's something that comes from, so you get into this conversation. So we did one on sort of my sometimes anxious attachment, and it was incredible how that was massively transformative to me. And I got a chance to speak to that part that has this desire, the craving for connection and whatever else is within that anxiously attached part, and then also to make it feel heard, to make the judgment of that part feel heard. And that just creates like an unlocking, really, where things can actually have the freedom to transform, because it becomes clear where these parts come from, and then there's an opportunity to see how they can let go of certain unhealthy or let go of certain attitudes which aren't serving either the part or the whole self, as it's called in IFS. And yeah, I really appreciate that both sessions you've guided me through have been really transformative. They also go incredibly quickly. Like the last one, I thought we've been going for half an hour, and you're like, okay, Simo, it's been 90 minutes already. I didn't really. What the hell? They go so fast. And they're really kind of psychedelic in flavor, I find, as well, because there's this creation of imagery that is almost like a skill, but it's just like a letting go allows it to emerge. And it the more you get into it, the more it kind of is just being produced out of magic. As you mentioned,
and maybe what I'll say like lastly about IFS is like, I think it is like, I would have found it quite difficult to understand how like self-compassion would lead to substantial outwards change. And so I think the way that I would describe that connection is like, somehow, like, if I want to do X, if I really understand all the reasons why I don't want to do X, like something softens up, and now I can actually be in relationship to that resistance, and I can like pursue X. Like suddenly I'm able to pursue X, but now like in dialogue with, you know, the parts of me that are kind of that don't want to do it, if that makes sense. It's so like somehow like befriending the resistance to doing a thing is what actually allows me to like at least start to take steps to do the thing, whether it's something about my relationship with my mom or making new friends or like whatever it is. At least that's my experience.
Great. Yeah, that resonates. So there was IFS. What's number 2 on this list?
NVC, which stands for nonviolent communication. It's a relatively popular framework for communicating. And it's really oriented around kind of like feelings and needs. And that ends up being a very useful way to communicate. Because there's a important distinction made with like judgments and stories, which are things about other people and the external world, right? So I in a given situation, I might say like, you're an asshole, or like, when you did X.
Well, you say that all the time to me.
I could say, one option is I could say you're an asshole. Another option is I could say, hey, when you did X, like I felt really like upset and angry because it like hurt my sense of self-worth. And like those two can be, one of those is much easier to hear. And then actually like in a sense, like one is much truer than the other one. And like more, right, like how that I feel angry and that I'm feeling like low is inarguable. Like no one can tell me that I'm not that.
Right.
But that you're an asshole is like probably is about to be a hotly debated topic, right?
Yeah. Some will say that is inarguable as well. But yeah.
And so
there's one of them's an objective observation about your own experience, uncontrovertible, and go on. So
and so I would just say like basically I think like it ends up in my experience being just a really useful way to communicate in general with anyone, particularly in times of like conflict or tension, but often really valuable for just like sharing some of our inner world too, and can be really connective if assuming everyone's on board.
I find in times of like particular tension that it's a totally different framing on like naming. Like when people say you're an asshole, there is a desire to like I guess the full thing of what they're saying is, I think you are an asshole, which is also still a judgment. But it's like they're trying to convey something of, or we are when we use those things. We're trying to convey something about our own experience, but it doesn't usually land in a way that's going to lead to an outcome that is ultimately desirable. But most people want to ideally have harmony with each other, or to have empathy with one another. And there's a way of communicating difficulties which are far more likely to lead to collaboration and connection. And the MVC framework was really the one that set me off on this journey of like cultivating relational skills. And just to give like another part of the process, just very briefly, there's like, there's these 4 steps, I guess, which is like objective observation. What happened, that both parties could like concretely agree to the description of what happened. Feeling, what is it I feel? I feel low, I feel angry. What do I need? And then finally a request. And I think there's still a way to like use this framework in ways which are more clunky or less clunky, and I sometimes use it in ways that are too clunky and still don't get the desired result, which is to try to bring empathy. But I think this pointing towards feelings. And also you can direct the process onto the other person to have them deliver to you in a way that is actually more nuanced and allows the listener to understand more. And it cultivates an air of collaboration, and it can bring down the temperature if someone is actually not speaking through this framework initially. Yeah, so you've used both MVC. It's just the groundwork part still. So
this is also the groundwork. Yeah.
Great. MVC. What was number 3 on the list?
Authentic relating and circling.
Nice.
Yeah. So authentic relating. Actually, you introduced me to. You introduced me to both authentic relating and circling. Oh no, not authentic relating, but circling. You did. Yeah, authentic relating. I feel like you could probably describe better than me, but I describe as, I don't know, a set of maybe like principles and practices for connecting with each other. In practice, often it looks like authentic relating games. So someone might host like an AR games night for a few hours, get people to come, and people would play games that are kind of like structured conversations that like explore different aspects of like communication, and somehow that ends up often being really connective. Yeah. And there's a strong emphasis on speaking from I statements, speaking about feelings, right? Kind of like there's a strong dovetail with NVC. There's a lot of emphasis. At least in some of the games, there's a strong emphasis on like presence, like present moment, like what's going on for me right now. And can I name that? Which is like just the skill of like noticing how I'm feeling right now and naming it is like, was in terms of my working on my relationship with my mom was like pivotal. That was arguably the most important thing that I was able to do.
I wonder, just to jump ahead and maybe pull back again afterwards, I'm curious if there are any specific interactions, moments where you remember doing that with your mom off the top of your head.
Yeah, there were many. There were definitely a few where we're having a conversation, it's not really going anywhere, like we're starting to argue, like we're starting to debate, like it's hitting a dead end, and I would like pause. I'd be like okay, give me a second. I'd pause, I'd close my eyes, I'd like take some deep breaths, I'd try and ground. I'd be like, okay, what am I feeling? Like what's going on? Like where am I at right now? And often I was, it depended on the conversation, but maybe I would say something like, oh, like I noticed I'm feeling really frustrated because like what I really wanted to talk about was this thing, and I was really hoping that you would understand or see me like for this, but it feels like we're like caught up talking about this other thing, and like there's it salvaged some of our conversations, right? Like the like pausing, regrounding. Yeah, I think in some cases it salvaged some conversations, in some cases it like enabled some conversations. And pretty much every time it helped in whatever way was necessary.
Yeah, so that was an example of one kind of thing you learned from authentic relating, which was like pausing, noticing your experience, sharing your experience, and like the tangible output of that is that when you're in a conversation that's maybe going off the rails, you can use that technique. And yeah, authentic relating, as you pointed out, is like a collection of many different activities, and one of them is like the noticing game, which is about like noticing what I'm experiencing in this moment. And some of them are about bringing more curiosity or cultivating more understanding of other people's judgments, or just any possible little angle on one thing you could bring to an interaction. There's like these really sort of focused activities that are very structured and very useful for practicing in a way that's for me has also it's transformed my relationships. And I think I find I usually use it when, I guess, two times when I use authentic relating. One is when tensions are getting high. I find it's incredibly powerful. And then I tend to lean into it more when I've got new connections. I think it's a way to like accelerate understanding of a new person and a new relationship, a new friendship, a new connection, in a way that's useful as well. And like I think it's important not to lean into that too much, and also to understand like where people's comfort zones are. And part of authentic relating is really like encouraging the holding of boundaries and not pushing into stuff with too much intimacy too soon and things like that. And that's another thing that's been really useful about the practice for me. I think sometimes it gets like caricatured as like people who, and the caricature comes from a place that has some truth, like people who just want to like force intimacy into every every conversation. And maybe there's times when I do like doing that as well, but I think that's not what authentic relating is actually about. It's about like practicing all elements of being in relationship, and part of that is holding our boundaries, ensuring that others are holding their boundaries, really checking in with each other about where they are in a conversation. And yeah,
absolutely.
Great. So you mentioned, was circling like part of number 3, or was that number 4?
I mean, I guess circling is a separate practice. I associate it, like I feel like it's quite close. It's in a lot of ways close to authentic relating, but I guess a subset of it. I guess I would describe the circling as like, no, it's different. I'd say circling is a practice that's like fully focused on presence, like the present moment, noticing experience, noticing other people's experience, or like getting curious about it, and like exploring my experience and exploring other people's experience, exploring like what's going on between us. It's to me, it's a more like intense practice. It's a more like challenge. It's a more like, I would say juicy practice. And I guess most relevant as far as like mom stuff goes is like most practical, like actual practice, like the closest thing to actual practice. Because right, the reality is like when I'm talking to my mom, like I'm like often I'm like pretty triggered. Like I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm whatever.
Yeah.
You know. And what I needed to learn to do was like to be able to like reground myself, to like have that, to do the pause, to check in with myself, like when it's hard, right? It's easy to do that when it's easy and like the other person's encouraging you to do it, and you know everyone's doing it, and you know in like this nice warm fuzzy space. But it's hard to do it when like someone is like, when you're in mid argument with someone. Encircling more closely models that, or more closely, it still isn't the same thing as the real thing, but it's closer in terms of like people have often like major emotional like outbursts in circling. Like there's every circling session is different, but often like emotions can get charged, and And it's like, in my experience, like a safe and supportive container to go there.
I just want to paint the picture of what a cycling session looks like, just for people who maybe don't get a full grasp of it yet. I guess it tends to be people sitting in a circle. I guess is 2 people still cycling usually? Like, does that count as, I don't know, two plus people, often like 10, maybe even 15. I guess I've been in circles maybe even as big as 20. It gets quite complex at the point, I guess. But I'd say people, I find like 4, 5, 6 is a nice number. But there's different dynamics. You're sitting in a circle and you're as you say, noticing what's real. And there's like an element of like following the impulse. And for me, there's something about cultivating courage and bravery. I think it's still a struggle for me to lean into naming my experience in an environment with other people around who are also wanting to name theirs, and where there's like, you notice energy going to different people sometimes, and there's focus on someone, and there's curiosity, and sometimes someone will jump in and just be like, I'm bored of this, and that's just such a courageous thing to do, but it's real for that person, and you don't have to follow their impulse. You can say, well, I don't like what you just said, or we can go with that, or then maybe there's something beyond that which can actually be explored that ties into other things that have been happening. And it's a really amazing practice to complexly, with great complexity, explore interpersonal dynamics, but there's great purity to it as well. For me, I describe like authentic relating to circling as like learning this. Authentic relating is learning some scales and learning some chords, and circling is like playing jazz with a whole fucking orchestra. And there's like the scales and chords, but well, that leads to a lot of like dynamic songs and entire albums and totally, beautiful and intense music.
Totally. Yeah.
And it's not that like a scale or a chord can be nice, and in alternate relating you can get some depth still, but there's this whole like multi-hour sometimes dynamic that emerges.
Totally. Yeah, I resonate with all of that. And the only thing that I would add or like suggest and edit is like, in that metaphor of authentic relating would be learning chords, and circling would be like practicing jazz. The final step is still performance. You still actually need to go out into the world and play the jazz, and that's what.
Which is like being in relationship.
Yeah, this is what going to Taiwan and working on my relationship with my mom felt like. Is like, this is the actual. This is the game. This is the real deal. Like, this is actually integrating it into the world in my life. And
that's going on tour, playing night after night to big audiences. That's like the practice of circling. Yeah, because before, when you said circling is not the real thing, I felt like I didn't quite agree, because sometimes in circles you get a lot of, it's all real, and sometimes you get some genuine conflict emerging. But I see what you're saying. Like there's the real world, which is building long-term relationships and pulling this tool into there. I describe circling as like the single most, like the ratio of how useful it is to how much people know, how many people know it, and how well people know it. I say is like the most extreme of anything I know of. I just think if I could click my fingers and have everyone in the world be proficient at a skill, it would be circling.
Yeah,
I think it would completely transform the world.
I agree. Yeah. I find circling to be extremely powerful, and so like it's like a opportunity to like slow down and debug and actually understand what happens when like people talk to each other.
Should we do some now for the audiences at home?
Sure, we can do that. Yeah.
So I was saying, like, I don't know if circling is really circling with 2 people, but I guess it is. There's like a different dynamic.
Why not?
And there's a game in authentic relating called the noticing game, which may be like an easier place to start if you've not done this, which is like a turn-taking, quite narrowed version of circling, which is like, being with you now, I notice. Maybe would you be up for starting with the noticing game?
Sure.
Being with you now, I notice. Oh, it's interesting because we're communicating within the container of a podcast, and it feels kind of, it's so weird. I feel like almost like I'm inside a TV show or something, which is like we don't have a script, but I feel like I'm not as natural as I could be, or as I am when I'm not being like recording myself. it feels like kind of fun. It's like a fun TV show, but it's also like almost like my body's got some tension to it, which it doesn't usually have, some rigidity, and I think that's indicative of like myself trying to slightly pull myself into a shape that isn't entirely myself.
Yeah, hearing that, I notice, yeah, some compassion for that being like a kind of challenging to navigate, like kind of these multiple roles or hats or.
Yeah, hearing that. Well, some curiosity came immediately because I think I noticed I had an expectation that you would name like feeling the same phenomenon or something, and instead you're like, oh, there's compassion for me. That was kind of surprising, and then it highlighted that it's not unpleasant. It's kind of like being on a ride or something. It's like, okay, this is weird. I'm like fixed into something a bit, but it's kind of exciting. I also notice I'm like, my mind's going quite quickly and I have a desire to slow down because I'm not tapping into my feelings as much as I would like in this process. I mean, I think my mind's going so fast, I'm almost pulling myself out of the game, which is interesting.
Yeah, hearing you say that, I noticed like some like facial tension drop in my face, lessen in my face, and I also kind of like, I was like, oh, slow down. I will do that too.
Yeah, I notice my heart's quite fast, beating quite fast. There's like a lot of tension and heat. I also went to the gym yesterday for the first time in like over a week.
Ow!
And my pecs are just like, oh. So I think that's almost like the sort of slightly torn muscle is, I mean, exactly the place where the emotion is, and it's like it's kind of amplifying it. It's also quite comfortable whilst being tense.
Yeah, hearing that, I notice like some playful wanting to make jokes energy come through. Yeah, like yeah, hearing you share, I was like, I almost jumped in with a joke or two, but then I didn't.
So this game could go on. I'm unsure if I guess sometimes this game can go for hours, indefinite, forever, for the rest of your life, and sometimes it lasts 3 minutes. I think, yeah, I'm pulling myself out of the game now, closing the game. Unless, do I want to finish off? Maybe we'll find. Let's have a final turn. Final turn each.
Final turn each. Cool.
Yeah, hearing you share about wanting to make a joke, I felt like supported. Like both like your desire to do that. I imagine, I assume, was coming from a place of wanting to like create fun and levity and stimulation, and then like your pulling back was maybe like out of concern for how I would want to conduct this for the camera or something. So yeah, I have an assumption that was out of care, and that feels a bit like a hug, like a nourishing friendship kind of thing.
Yeah, I notice I'm feeling maybe a bit of like sheepishness because I think, well, I definitely wasn't consciously thinking that far. I think I was, I was primarily oriented around like just kind of honoring like the way that the game is played. And yeah, like if I drop into like why honor those rules, yeah, I think the things that you shared feel relevant, at least part of it. So yeah, I feel I feel glad to be appreciated in that way.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah.
I appreciate the game. So that's the noticing game. And I like to talk about authentic relating games as like having rules that are there to be broken, and or guidelines that are there to be broken, and like the breaking of them is an interesting thing to reflect on afterwards, because it's just another relational dynamic that's emerging. I guess there are guidelines there that we usually follow when playing this game, and in circling, in a way, there are guidelines, but they feel like even less like guidelines. Like there's so much breaking of norms that can be experimented with in circling, which is like often very interesting, and it can be quite triggering for people, and it can bring up a lot, but it's a container in which to practice that intensity, and sometimes it's not intense at all. Yeah. So circling, MBC, IFS, authentic relating, these were the groundwork for the transformation of your relationship with your mom.
Totally. Yeah, in terms of I feel like I would add crewing maybe as like part of being as being foundational. I don't know. It's like, where do you draw the line? But like the line, I feel like, between like, I don't know, practices and structures, and I don't know, like,
yeah. My sense is, so we could talk about crewing as well in a minute, I think. But I guess
yes, those four. Yeah,
my assumption is.
Yeah.
So one more time.
Those were the four that I named. Yeah.
Great.
Definitely.
Yeah, four. My sense is those four are like very specific frameworks for communication that carry through to how we interact with people in the real world. Crewing perhaps is more of a broader structural
like a social
way of connecting.
Yeah.
So before we go to that, well, I just want to name. I think, are we coming up to like 5 minutes to an hour long now? Is that correct? So
probably.
Cool. Yeah, I'd be up for like wrapping up the conversation on your mom, if there feels like there's a bit more to like close there perhaps, and like what happened with using those things with your mom, touching in on crewing, microsolidarity. We haven't talked about at all your like incredibly interesting journey in the last 3 or 4 years, which is like, I think would also produce a lot of fuel for like the Johnsons being traveling the world for like 3 or 4 years. How long?
4 years. A little over
like
4.
4 years, 2 banana shirts, 4 years. That's like your epitaph. Yeah.
Here lies Johnson. 2 bananas. Shirts.
Yeah. And like there's so much in there about how to make friends on the road, and how wrestling with loneliness, making new community. Maybe we could have another episode just on like travel. I think that could be actually like a whole other thing that both of us could talk about. We've both traveled extensively. Totally. I wasn't expecting to talk so much about family, which is obviously a part of like a huge part, community and friendship and isolation, loneliness and relationship. So what happened? So you did the groundwork. You practiced a bunch with these technologies. You used them. You did a lot of personal growth work. Then you brought it to your mom. Is there more to say on that?
I mean, I guess in practice it looked like just a couple of dozen like really intense conversations that ultimately like surfaced misunderstandings, cleared the air, like allowed big emotions to move, and ultimately like fostered a lot of connection and unlocked a lot of love. I would say, I mean, like those were like those like that together was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. So not easy, but also like among the most probably also the most rewarding thing I've ever done. Like this is related, like this is actually like deeply related to my experience of like connecting with people, but didn't become relevant or available until later in my life. But I would say basically, unblocking all that love with my mom really unblocked a lot of love for myself, and is basically like kind of like fundamentally shifted how I like relate to people. Basically, I used to have like a lot of anxiety when
Mm.
talk to someone new, and now I like don't have that, for example. Um, and so yeah, my experience is that a lot of social anxiety boils down to like fear of rejection. And fear of rejection in my experience largely boils down to, if I'm rejected, it will prove that I am bad. um and like unblocking the love in my relationship with my mom like removed this I am bad, and so actually like the whole chain kind of dissolves. um or in my experience it did. And sometimes I
Yeah.
feel like crazy for talking about this, because like no one else, I don't know, even within like self-help, self-healing, self-development fields, like no one really like goes back and does the integration work with their parents. And I'm kind of over here like, does has anyone else tried this? Like it was pretty huge, man. Like it kind of solved like all the
Mm.
problems. Not all the problems, but like a lot of them. um yeah,
Amazing.
so
Well, I know there's a bunch of people out there doing like who have done huge work with their parents and transport, like Kimberly
that's true.
Hand. She wrote this
There's some, yeah,
article,
absolutely.
and then my friend Michelle, who will have on the podcast
Oh,
in the
nice.
next week or two, also has a similar story. I'm not sure how that relates to self love though. So so just to clarify, this mechanism of action was like heal relationship with mom, unlock love for self, remove social anxiety.
Basically, yeah, was what happened for me.
Yeah. It's wonderful. I see a lot of people, most people perhaps, just like unable to have those conversations with their parents. Just like they just don't know how, or they can't bring maybe the courage to have those conversations, or there's a sense that it's not possible. Like my parents wouldn't be available for that kind of conversation, for example. What would you say to those kind of people in that situation with those perspectives?
Yeah, I mean, I guess first and foremost, I would say like, I don't know your situation. Like even if yeah, like it's fucking hard. Even if you're able to do it, it's fucking hard. And yeah, like I totally could understand if it's not possible. I think depending on like on a case by case basis, I would probably like push back on the notion that it's like fundamentally not possible. There's probably like varying degrees of like difficulty, varying degrees of challenges, or not even degrees, just like varying challenges. um and like it's a lot of
Mm.
fucking work. Even if it is possible, it's a lot of fucking work. And so if like someone doesn't have the time, the resources, like the emotional space, the support to do it, like, well, maybe it's like I get it, like that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Totally. I agree that resonates. Um, like, don't feel there's nothing to feel ashamed of if some, like, it's the hardest relationship and
Yeah.
there's so much there, and if it's taken a turn for the worse, it's not a reason to be ashamed and to feel
Totally.
like you haven't done enough. It's something to learn from. I think it's the greatest source of learning. Like it's useful if you're able to look at what happened there, to try and identify the roles every person in that story played, and to see how you might grow and be in a way that works perhaps better in future relationships, because like the relationship with our parents shapes us more than anything else, and we have a choice ultimately about what we want to do about that. And it might not be that we can go back to our parents and change the relationship we have them. Maybe some people are able to. You've done an amazing job. I haven't spoken to my father for 4 years, and I'm still thinking about that. If there's a way in, and there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of challenge. It's like, is this doable? Maybe if I was more skilled, maybe if I was more brave, or maybe it's not. and that's something I'm thinking about. But at the same time, I'm trying to draw lessons from things I could have done differently, so that I can show up better in a way that I'm more proud of in other relationships in my life. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Let's segue. Let's try, like, just for a few minutes to wrap up on a final topic, perhaps, of microsolidarity.
Yeah.
What the hell's microsolidarity, man?
Yeah. So microsolidarity is this word that this guy came up with. His name is Rich. And the way that I describe it is it's like a framework for thinking about groups and communities, and like how groups kind of work, group dynamics, communities, how they form, how, like, what makes them work well. And it says a lot of stuff about all of that stuff. Yeah, and the slice of it that I have, like, dug into the most is crewing. So one of the things that he says about groups is that different sizes of groups are, like, ideally suited for different things. So these groups of size 3 to 6, which he calls crews, like the crew of a boat, like your crew, is really great for things like emotional support, accountability, building relational skills, like collaborating, other stuff. And the TLDR is like, crews are great, or it should be in cruise forever. Yeah, and so I've really leaned into that, and I've started and been part of a lot of crews, and that's been like a really that's been really great for me, just in a lot of different ways, whether it's like connection, getting support, whether it's practice, reconnecting, deepening relationships, yeah, all that and more.
And so crews, typically 3 to 6 people. I think in the beginning there's a kind of cadence of like meeting online once every 2 weeks for about 6 weeks and seeing how that goes. And then sometimes the idea is, hopefully, if people feel good, that extends. And there's all kinds of different ways those kind of hangouts can go. And there's a bunch of different, like, structured frameworks people can use, or they can be more free form.
Yeah.
And we've been in a crew now for about 6 months or so, I guess.
Yeah, several months. Yeah.
So I pulled together that crew, which was like I think at that point you had like 13 crews going simultaneously somehow. Yeah. Absolutely like ludicrous. Amazing. Yeah, just like fulfilling your need. You want social connection in your life, and like you're traveling a lot and you've got all these people you know around the world. And this is one thing that people mentioned in your birthday doc, is like you make shit happen. And like, well, what is it you want? You want connection. How can I do that? You've got this framework for crews. You went out and built a bunch. Awesome. Amazing. I don't know anyone else who's done that. And that's like really impressive way to, like, well, it's not only getting your needs met, but the amount of things you learn and the amount of support you can both give and receive through all those different groups of people is just, with all kinds of different focuses in each group. It's amazing thing to build into your life. You mentioned like crews are just one component of microsolidarity. I don't have a really solid understanding of microsolidarity. I had assumed that it was like the central kind of component, but is that not actually the case? Is it that the other sizes of that so there's crews? What are the other size groups you call them? How do they function?
Yeah, it's kind of the main ones are like self, dyad, crew, congregation, and then crowd.
And congregation's how many?
Congregation, I think he throws out like Dunbar's number, like 150-ish. Yeah.
And then you said there's one more
up to. I think what does he call it? A crowd or a network or something? I forget. I don't know. That one he doesn't. I think that one's not so developed.
And so what's the deal with the the congregations?
Yeah, so congregations, he says, which I largely agree with, that one of the main purposes of congregations is to be dating pools for crews, basically.
that's like the primary purpose, or it's just like one of the functions.
I think he argues that it's the primary purpose. And if I could be wrong, which I am like mostly on board with. Yeah.
And are they largely in person or digital or occasional or permanent?
I guess all of these things can be digital or in person. And I mean, in a sense, like they're just describing groups of sizes of people. So like, you know, every climbing gym is a congregation. Every like, I don't know.
But there's a
like
difference to just going to a climbing gym versus a Microsolidarity group of the same size, I would imagine.
Sure.
There's some kind of structure and interaction that's intended.
Sure. Of course. Yeah. There's like Microsolidarity suggests a bunch of principles, practices that are helpful to groups of congregation size for cultivating greater connection between their members, the people in them, for cultivating greater belonging, for cultivating greater longevity, for cultivating greater like effectiveness, like all of those kind of things.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd love to dig more into that. I'm curious, of all the crews you've been in, which one, or if one does stand out as having been like the most potent, the most powerful, the most useful, the most transformative or enjoyable,
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that like was most meaningful, like produced the most meaningful change in me, was like the first one that I was in, that I was invited to by my friend Jared. Yeah, and that was the longest. That one was running for a long time, and I feel like that's the setting that I would say I learned to like basic listening, like how to listen to someone without like spending the whole time formulating thoughts in my head, like how to reflect, how to like rephrase what someone told me in a way that helps, that like creates trust, that like I understood what they said. How to not jump to advice anytime someone like shares a problem. Those are some like basic things that I just needed to learn to do.
And was that from following the case clinic format, or was there another reason that was those things were cultivated?
Primarily from following the case clinic format, like with that group, of course. Yeah, we're a case clinic.
Can you describe the case clinic format briefly?
Yeah, it's basically like a kind of structured conversation oriented around kind of like peer support. So like someone will share a problem or challenge that they're facing, and for about an hour, this group of 3 or 4 or whatever it is people we'll listen, we'll ask some questions, we'll reflect what they heard, and then kind of offer possible suggestions. It's relatively straightforward, but kind of the structure of it I found to be really helpful in like checking myself of like, I'm wanting to launch into advice, but that's not for another 10 minutes. Okay, like what if I just like drop that and like just like actually just listen to this person speak,
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's really interesting that you name like the most powerful experience you've had in Microsolidarity. The most meaningful was this transformation of how you can, and I guess I'm paraphrasing, but in a way how you can support others better, rather than like what you got from your case clinic or a specific transformation you saw happen. It was like this change in your approach to interaction that you learned from Microsolidarity.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess it makes sense why you wanted to put that in the list of the other ones now, because it was like perhaps that it really was a powerful tool in transforming the way you go about interacting. Yeah, wonderful. And I've found it good for reinforcing those things too. Yeah, my little experience of crewing.
Yeah,
cool. So there's a lot more I want to talk about. So perhaps we'll have another call at some point if you're open to it, to talk about like travel and connection on the road, loneliness, making new friends and moving to new places, all that kind of thing. I guess the place well, there's a couple of places online where you're most public and where people might be able to find you and reach out to you and read your stuff and all that.
Yeah.
Where's that?
Probably Twitter. My handle is just a vagrant _. I also write some stuff on Medium. I think my name there is Johnson HS.
And how did you come up with just a vagrant as your handle, and when was that? I actually have no idea about that.
How did I come up with it? I think it was like there was something self-deprecating to it from a long time ago.
Yeah.
Of like when I hit the road, like, yeah, like I'm just like this, like I'm just a dude, just like bumbling around, seeing stuff, doing stuff.
Yeah. Does this still resonate?
There's like a playful version of it. Yeah, I think there's like, and the playful interpretation still resonates. I'm like, yeah, like, but there's also a part of me that kind of wants to like that. And a big theme of my last several months has been around kind of like stepping into, you know, my power and like celebrating myself, owning, you know, like myself and the things that I've done and that are like really quite meaningful, at least to me. And so there's a part of me that's like, oh, like what if I chose something that was like not less self-deprecating and like kind of like honored myself in whatever it is that I've done.
Yeah.
So that came
not just a vagrant,
right? Like not just a vagrant, like yeah, certainly part of it, but
part vagrant.
So yeah, maybe I'll noodle on that one. But for now,
great. Yeah, that's really interesting. There's been this transformation that you're wanting to be less self-deprecating, and this is kind of coming from this transformation into greater sense of like self-love and owning this almost like newfound power that's come from that.
Yeah, definitely.
Right on. Thank you, Johnson. Any final words that feel like they need to be spoken at this point?
No, that's great. I appreciate the time and the chat.
Likewise, much appreciated. Looking forward to sharing this and looking forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you so much for being the first guest on my new podcast. See how this goes from here. Really appreciate it. Talk to you soon, brother.
Woo. Thanks.